So here's the situation. You're going to go up into a plane and you get to choose which of two pilots is going to take you up. All you know is that they recently graduated from flight school and they both have an average 75% was their score. Maybe you want to turn around and go back at this point, but 75% is passing. So do you have enough information to choose which pilot you want to take you up into the sky with? You really don't. What if I told you a little bit more about that grade? What if I told you that one of those pilots started off really strong? They just had some great innate skill, and then over the course of flight school, they got a little bit worse, a little bit worse, a little bit worse. Each time they went up, their test score got a little bit lower and lower. Maybe they have trouble at home, maybe their eyesight is failing, I don't know, but it went down and down and down. So they ended at about a 50%. Whereas the other pilot started off kind of slow, and they kind of got gradually better and better and better. And by the end, they had actually a 90%, but both have an average of 75. So now do you have more information to know which pilot you want to go up into the sky with? I think so. Hi, it's Terra with Blue Apple, and thanks for joining me today to talk about everybody's favorite subject, grades. I actually want to make a case for standards-based grading and what it can mean for your classroom and give you a few ideas to maybe try it out. So I used the example of the two pilots at the beginning to show that clearly, just a straight average is not what we need for grades, right? There's much more to it than that. The trajectory of how you got to that end grade or that final average matters, but there's more to it than that. I want to think about another pilot example. This time you're going to go up with two pilots, Sasha and Jamal, or you have your choice between them. And if we looked at their grades, they both got a 90%. Sounds great. Ready to go up with both of them? But what if you looked a little bit closer, not at the trajectory, but at what kind of the skills that they are best at? So let's look at Sasha. She has a 90% because she excels at barrel rolls and flying upside down, right? But Jamal, he's not so great at those. They really kind of tanked his score, but he's excellent at landings and at maintaining altitude. Now which one do you want to go up with? I want to go out for happy hour with Sasha, but I'm getting in the plane with Jamal. Here's an example a little closer to home. My own daughter just finished her driver's course and passed the test with a 75%. Great, she passed. But wouldn't I like to know, and all the other drivers on the road with her like to know, what skills she actually masters and which ones she didn't? Just saying. So what does this mean for you in your classroom? Well, I'm going to make an assumption that we're on the same page, that we want grades to reflect what students know and are able to do. And if that's the case, I'm sad to tell you that most of the grading systems used in our country just don't accomplish this. So that's why there's so much buzz around standards-based grading. A lot of what I learned about standards-based grading came from Rick Wormley, and especially his book, Fair Isn't Always Equal. It's a great read for not only standard-based grading, but also just differentiated instruction in general. He's also a great speaker if you have a chance to see him. But I'm happy to share a few of the highlights from that book and some other things that I've learned along the way. So what is standards-based grading? Well, it's simply a framework for communicating what students know and are able to do at any given point in time. What's most important about this is that it's criterion referenced, meaning it's tied to actual description of evidence. So rather than taking, your scores over the last 9 weeks for math and averaging it together to come up with one math score, you're looking at each standard that you need to learn for math, and you're assessing each student against each standard. Now, sounds like a lot more work, right? But I swear it's not. Trust me, I'll give you some time-saving tips in a minute. Fundamentally, standards-based grading is meant to make grades more meaningful because they're assessed against learning targets, actual learning. It also makes them more accurate because you're not assessing non-academic skills and you're also not putting them on a curve, kind of assessing them against other students. It also makes grades more consistent because you have a criterion reference there, something that you're always going back and referencing. And finally, it makes grades more actionable. It makes it clear what feedback needs to be given, what standard do I need help with, so students can take action and ownership of their own learning. So now that we know what standards-based grading is, let's talk a little bit more about how to make it work for you in your classroom. We're going to talk about 4 strategies for you to consider. The first one is simply aligning your assignments to actual standards. So this is really as simply as kind of changing the way you think about your grade book. First of all, you have to identify what standards you need to teach and what are those power standards. Remember the plane analogy? We want to make sure that we know not all standards are created equal. So once you know that, then you align your assignments to it. So rather than just having names in a grade book and assignments and just kind of logging a grade for each assignment, you want to think about, in this assignment, what actual skills or learning targets am I trying to assess? So you might actually have 3 different grades for any given assignment because it's actually talking about they're assessing 3 different learning targets. Remember I said this sounds like more work, but it's actually not? So invariably, when I work with teachers to kind of transform their gradebook in this way, we always find different assignments that actually they can throw out because they don't meet any actual learning targets. So ditch those, get rid of them, save yourselves and your students that time. The second strategy I'd like you to consider is ditching the 100-point scale. I know this one's a little radical, but if you are trying to assess every student against every standard, the last thing you want is 100 degrees of complexity in that. The fewer the better, if you ask me. There are all sorts of scales out there, and the 100-point scale is so ingrained in us that it feels really natural and intuitive, but it's actually anything but. I'm a big fan of a 4-point scale. It gives you fewer degrees of complexity to kind of grapple with, and a 3 means you've met the standard. So it's a way to kind of narrow your choices and make sure you're kind of addressing that criterion reference. But you don't always have a choice in this, right? Sometimes your community is just so ingrained it needs the 100-point scale. So all you need then is your decoder ring. You just need to find a way to translate your 4-point scale into a criterion referenced version on a 100-point scale. Let me explain. So if you in your classroom are using that 4-point scale and you decide that 3 means you're hitting the standard, and let's say 2 means you're almost proficient, and you have to use a 100-point system. Well, then you think about what is almost proficient on a 100-point system. Is that 89? Is that 87? Whatever it is, you either in your classroom, if that's what you have control over, or as a school, decide. Let's say you say it's 87. Then every time you have a 3, that's an 87. There's no 86s, there's no 88s. 87 means you're almost proficient. The third strategy to think about is eliminating zeros on a 100-point scale. On the shorter scale, the 3 or 4 or 5-point scale, they're fine. But on a 100-point scale, I want you to think a little bit about what a 0 actually does. For the upper part of the range, we have these 10-point segments, right? 100 to 90 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B. But when it comes to the F range, the failure range, we have 60 points, from 0 all the way up to 59 points. So there's this huge range of failure. Just imagine, what if it was the opposite? What if there was a 40-point range for an A? What if it was, or a 60-point range rather, for an A, if it was from 40 to 100? It'd be virtually impossible to not get straight A's. So when we give a kid a 0 at the very bottom of that 60 points of failure, then we're doing the same thing. It's virtually impossible for them to reach up into passing, much less any kind of excelling or being successful. And if you think about it, if failure just means there's no evidence of meeting that standard, well, 59 says that and a 0 says that. But what's the difference? The difference is hope. With a 59, you still have some hope. With a 0, you don't. You have no way to really kind of make up that huge gap of F-dom, right? So I know this one's kind of controversial, because what about that kid who didn't turn in their work, right? Shouldn't they get a 0? Well, I'm not saying that there's no consequences for not turning in work, but you know what the best consequence for not turning work is? It's doing the work, right? So you make them do the work again. It allows them to get out of that 0 trap, but also, more importantly, it shows them that you care, that they actually get the work done. So the last strategy I want to share with you is to ask you to consider to separate out non-academic skills. If our grades are supposed to reflect what students know and are able to do, then it's fundamentally inaccurate to include non-academic skills. But what about the student who wasn't participating in class, or who didn't turn in their homework, or who missed a deadline? Those things are important. I would just encourage you to have a separate scale for that. You could use the same 4-point scale, but call these habits of work. And you assess those, but don't grade them and mix them in with academic grading. So those are some of the basic tenets of standard-based grading for you to consider. First, let's align all those assignments to actual standards and learning targets. Second, ditch that 100-point scale if you can. Third, get rid of zeros on that 100-point scale. It's just too big of a gap for them to come back from. And 4, separate out those non-academic skills. They're important, super important, but let's separate them. I hope it was helpful, but check out the download for some more information on standards-based grading. And most importantly, give it a try in your classroom. Let us know how it goes, what works for you, and what other ideas you have. And as always, if you like what you see here on these Blue Apple how-to videos, please like and subscribe so we can keep them coming. Till next time, thanks for being awesome.